Picture this, it's just 48 days before the 2022 national elections in the Philippines. The whole country is on edge. And right then, a massive lawsuit lands at the Supreme Court. It was a case called National Press Club versus COMELEC, and believe me, this wasn't just some minor legal squabble. This was a direct challenge to the transparency of our entire democratic process.
But here's where it gets kind of weird. Check out this timeline. So the petition gets filed in March. Then on May 9th, the election happens just like it's supposed to. Winners are declared, a new government sworn in, life goes on. And then, silence. Until more than a year later, in June 2023, the Supreme Court drops its decision, for the election that was already ancient history by that point.
And that really is the million-dollar question here, isn't it? Why would the highest court in the land bother ruling on a fight that was, for all intents and purposes, already over? The results were in, the game was done, so what's the point?
Well, to get it, you gotta understand this legal idea of a moot case. Think of it like a referee wanting to call a foul in a basketball game, but the game ended yesterday and everyone's gone home. A ruling now isn't going to change the final score, right? It's lost all practical meaning. And usually, courts just toss these cases out. But not this one. See, here's the kicker. There's this super important exception to the rule. The Supreme Court said it will rule on a moot case if the issue is capable of repetition yet evading review. And elections are the perfect example of this. They're on a super tight schedule. By the time any lawsuit works its way up to the top, the election's over. So if the court just kept dismissing these cases, the same issues could happen over and over again, in every election, when we'd never get a final answer. This principle basically lets the court turn a case about the past into a rule for the future.
So now that the court had decided, yep, we're ruling on this, they got right down to it. The original lawsuit from the National Press Club laid out 4 big demands for more transparency, and the court went through them one by one, basically creating a powerful checklist that now tells us exactly what COMELEC has to do in all elections from now on. First up, a pretty basic request. The petitioners wanted to have observers right there at the National Printing Office, physically watching as millions and millions of official ballots were being printed, a fundamental part of keeping elections honest.
So what did the court say? On this first demand, the verdict was a loud and clear granted. COMELEC's excuse was, we can't have observers because of security and COVID-19, but the court basically said, nice try. They ruled that while, health protocols are important, they don't give you a free pass to break the law. And they pointed out that a simple live stream would have solved the problem. The message for the future is crystal clear. Access is non-negotiable.
All right, let's move on to the second demand. This one was all about the tech, the actual hardware, the vote-counting machines, the VCMs, and those tiny but super important SD cards that hold all the data.
And once again, the court's verdict was a big granted. The law is totally clear on this one. Political parties and citizen groups have an absolute right to test the election gear. Now, this one got a little moot because COMELEC did eventually let people in to test the machines, but by ruling on it anyway, the court basically locked it in stone. This is now a cemented right, no ifs, ands, or buts.
Now we get to what is arguably the most important part of this whole ruling. This demand wasn't about watching people print stuff or test a machine. This was about seeing the invisible, the digital roadmap of the election itself.
So the petitioners asked to see the entire transmission diagram, basically a map showing how your vote gets from the polling place through all the digital checkpoints to the final count. And the court's verdict? Granted, in principle. They said this information is a matter of public concern. Why? Because if you can't see the map, how can you trust the journey?
And the court did not pull any punches. I mean, this quote right here says it all. They flat out said that if the election hadn't already happened, they could have legally forced COMELEC to hand over those diagrams. This is a huge deal. It sets a precedent that for every election going forward, we, the public, have a right to see the digital blueprint of our own votes.
Okay, the last demand really pushed the envelope. This wasn't about just watching or seeing documents anymore. This was about wanting to physically walk into the most secure, most critical parts of the election's digital infrastructure.
Yeah, they asked for physical access to data centers, server rooms, and this place called the Meet Me Room where everything connects. And on this point, the court drew a big fat line in the sand. The verdict was denied. They explained that transparency is one thing, but the law does not give anyone the right to just waltz into a high-security data center. That would be a massive security risk, and it's actually illegal.
So let's step back and look at the big picture. When you put all 4 of these rulings together, you realize the Supreme Court did more than just answer a few questions.
They actually created a whole blueprint for how to run a transparent and secure automated election in the future.
And it really boils down to 3 simple rules. Rule number 1, the process has to be transparent. We have to be allowed to watch key things like ballot printing and machine testing. Rule 2, information has to be transparent. We have a right to see the documents that explain how the whole system works. And rule number 3, the infrastructure must be secure. We don't get to physically access the servers and data hubs. It's a simple framework, really. You can watch, you can read, but you can't touch.
So there you have it, a landmark decision, sparked by an election that was already over, that now gives us the ground rules for every single election to come. It draws a very specific line between the people's right to know and the need to keep the system safe. And the big question this ruling leaves us with is a simple one. Did the Supreme Court draw that line in exactly the right place?